What do you do when you think your stakeholders are asking for all the wrong things? How do you approach that conversation? That's what we'll be talking about for the next 45 minutes or so. My name is Miriam McCabe. I lead the architect evangelism team at Salesforce, and I'm also a Salesforce CTA. And today, I'll be your host for Think Like an Architect. And this episode will be navigating trade offs and saying no with confidence. And obviously, I'm not going to do that alone. With me, I have my amazing friend and colleague, Lilith van Biezen, principal architect evangelist at Salesforce and also a Salesforce CTA. She is also the author of what I find to be a very amazing blog series on how to talk like an architect. And I'll be using many of her strategies and concepts in today's episode as well. Let me bring Lilith in quickly to say hi. Hi, Lilith. Good to see you. Do you want to say a few words to the group?
Oh, yes, for sure. So long-time commenter, first-time caller. So excited to be here. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting and somewhat different Think Like an Architect today. But all the key concepts apply. So
let's see. And see you in a minute. Thanks, Lilith. All right. So with that, let's get into it. And of course, this wouldn't be a Salesforce event if I didn't have a forward-looking statement. So please remember to make any purchasing decisions based on generally available products and services. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at the agenda. This is truly going to be a summer special. You may actually see that I am in my office at about 30 degrees centigrade. So I'm pretty hot, but it's a summer special. And it's going to be a little bit different, like Lilith alluded. So we'll do the same type of introduction, learning about the three-step approach, the what, the how, and the why. Just like always, we'll get into a specific challenge using that approach, but this time we're going to use it to prepare for communicating with a stakeholder about the solution, about possible alternatives. Of course, throughout the episode, feel free, please interact with all the wonderful people and knowledgeable people that are already here in the chat with us. And then after I get through the challenge, I'll bring Lilith back in and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So with that, let's get into the three-step approach. And remember, we're going to be applying these steps to a stakeholder communication session this time. The what step is all about understanding the requirements. The way we'll do it is I'll highlight the requirements so that I can form a good understanding of the high-level requirements. But what is new in this one is that I'll highlight pieces of the requirements that are actually solutions pretending to be requirements. I'll do that in a different color for clarity. In the how step, we'll take note of any kind of questions as we're going through solving those high-level requirements. I'll be drawing out the solution in a diagram. And what is the twist is that I'll also think about what it would look like if we would solve for what I think would be the actual requirements. More to follow. In the why step, I'm going to show you how I'm using all of those diagrams, the assumptions that I made in the how step to communicate alternatives to my stakeholder, which is where the no comes in. But I'll get back to that in a second. But Melissa may have beat me to the punch. But I promise I didn't have time to make this slide before she mentioned the why. When I first started doing this three-step approach, the what, the how, and the why, many people came to me and they were like, Miriam, are you not missing something? You start with the what, aren't you missing the initial why? And of course, they were right. In those episodes, however, the way that I got away with it, I hope, is I said that we were implying the why. Because we were focusing on the solution, we pretended that the why had already taken place and we were starting from a baseline of requirements that was already a little bit more mature. The reason I'm emphasizing the why now is because we need to truly understand what our stakeholder wants, why they're asking for the things they're asking for, so that we can empathize with them. And this will help us communicate whatever we want to say to them in a way that may resonate with them better. I mentioned about saying the word no. And a word on that. As an architect, and I think among architects, no is kind of shorthand for pushing back, but always from the idea of doing the right thing by our customer, right? So what we mean when we say no is we mean that we're saying yes to what our stakeholders really want or need, right? So it's very important to understand that saying no, I think, is a code, architect code for doing the right thing, right? And also to keep in the back of our minds that our stakeholders may not necessarily know this. So maybe not to emphasize the no aspect when we're talking to them. With that, let's get into the requirement. So what I have here is a business requirement. This time I'm using the shape of a request for proposal. So for those of you who are unsure what that is, it's an invitation that customers may send out to companies that do, in this case, Salesforce implementations, to get a proposal for how they would solve it and how much that would cost. It's a good example here, I think, because with these types of requirements, you don't really get a lot of freedom to change them, right? If you're going to propose something completely different, stakeholders might think that that is because you cannot solve the requirements that they actually had. So that's a good thing to keep in the back of mind. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to use yellow for whatever I think is like proper requirement or background information. And then I'm going to use rose for where I think that solutions are creeping in. So in the background, 2.1, Salesforce serves as the system of record for vendor management. And yes, I may not have said this yet, but this is a request for proposal for a vendor certification compliant solution. All right, let's continue. Vendor certifications are currently tracked manually. Okay. And with the certification renewal status confirmed by periodic, ad hoc cross-reference against the accrediting body's certification portal, which vendors use to upload renewal documentation upon recertification. Now, this is interesting, and I'm going to make use of these nuggets of information to already start building out what this solution is likely to, the components that it's likely to contain. And the one thing that I know for sure already at this moment is that it's an external system that is doing the accreditation. Let's get back into it. 2.2. The Q2 internal audit identified 2 instances. So there was an audit, there were 2 instances in which vendor engagements continued under lapsed certifications. This is my aha moment, but neither lapse was detected prior to the audit. Why is this my aha moment? This is the big why. This company, I realized that they had a compliance issue, that they were working with vendors that were no longer certified, with all the liability and risks that that might entail. So I'm noting this in the back of my mind because this is definitely the component that I want to bring back when I start to communicate my solution to the customer. Now, let's get into the requirements. And I've tried to phrase them RFP-like, right? And they're pretty directive typically. So 3.1, the solution shall include a new custom data object. Did you see it? This is a very common thing, right? People like to ask for objects or fields. But so I'm just highlighting it here. But what is really important and what the real requirement is here is to store that vendor certification data, including the fields that are mentioned here and the supporting documentation, which also has an estimated 15 fields. Highlighting that as solution, if I have one-on-one time with my stakeholder, what I would like to do is I would like to get them to rephrase this requirement together with me to just exclude the data object and the fields and agree that what they're looking for is a way to store this data. But we don't have time for that now, and it's an RFP. So let's move on. 3.2, the solution shall generate an automated notification to the assigned vendor manager. Okay. Whenever the word notification appears in a requirement, I'm immediately intrigued. And my first thought is, what's the process? And we'll get back to that in a second when we go through that requirement. Let's continue here now. 3 calendar days prior to the expiration of that cert. Okay, I'm just raising an eyebrow at the 3, but we'll also park that for now. Moving on. The solution shall provide a conversational query interface. That also sounds solution-y. That enables authorized staff across departments to retrieve the current vendor certification status. That feels like it's the requirement. Oh. Without manual record search, it's kind of solution-y, so highlighting that in rows as well. Now, you will have noticed that I've also put a missing/unsure here. And that is because now that I know the why, I'm thinking, is there anything immediately obvious that is missing from these requirements? Because that might be a good thing to bring in as well. And in fact, for me, without understanding any more, I'm wondering, should we do something with vendors if they're not certified? Should we maybe block them? So I'm going to note down vendors that are, I think at the very least, we should probably indicate that visually, which is something that I think I might propose. And the other thing I'm curious about is there is no mention of any type of integration, right? So that is something that I want to take a look at as well. So let's get into the first requirement. So the question that I ask myself when I see all of this is, and when people are asking for objects and fields and you name it, I want to know what are all the fields, or pretty much what does the data look like. And the reason that I want to know that is because I don't expect business to understand anything about relational databases or object mapping, or what should be a custom or a standard object or a field in Salesforce, right? And when I get a look at the shape of the data, it will be much easier for me to advise them on the data model. For the moment, RFP situation, so I'm just assuming that account is going to be used to capture the vendor. And I'm also going to assume for the moment that we want to store documents in Salesforce, which will make me, in terms of decision, make me point to a file-based solution. And obviously for account, we'll use the account object. Now, a note on the custom object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to also put in a placeholder for a custom object. I'm not saying yet that I'm going to use it, but I will quote for it so that it's part of my quote, even though I might decide different later on. So let's get into the diagram. And a note on this diagram, please be pre-warned that I will use a kind of mixy-matchy. So I'm going to create a hybrid diagram where I'm just going to pull in stuff that I think is relevant for me to be able to communicate the solution I'm proposing. Please don't try this at home. No, you can try this at home, but don't. This is not a replacement for a proper system landscape, for example, or a proper process map. Anyway, with those disclaimers out of the way, I'm putting into place account and vendor. Sorry, account and certification. And I'm keeping certification in the words of the requirements deliberately. So in my back of mind, I might use an object, definitely be using files probably. And what I also like to do is put in the names of the fields that they mentioned so that they really see that I'm meeting their requirements. I think that's it for the moment. So let's, excuse me. Let's get back into the next requirement. So this is the one where I have the most questions. I already mentioned process, right? Let's start with the first question that comes to mind. That is, how many vendors are we talking about? If we're talking about 3 vendors, it's going to look different than if we're talking about 3 million a year, right? I'm also kind of curious on how long does it typically take to renew? to renew a cert, because I don't know, from experience, 3 days feels a little tight. But then also, and this is the one that really gets me, it's like, what is that vendor manager going to do? What will the, and I'm going to abbreviate vendor manager as VM, just so that you don't have to watch a lot of typing. So what will the VM do once they get that notification? Anyway, for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some assumptions in line with their requirements. So my first assumption is that we'll notify based on the data, in Salesforce. And in terms of solution direction, yeah, some kind of scheduled process, right? I think that's pretty much it. The other thing, of course, that I need is an awareness of the vendor manager. So that's my other assumption, that I'm going to store the vendor manager on account. Or maybe that's actually a solution. Let me just put it here. Let me also add it to the landscape. So I'm going to put the vendor manager here. I know I said that I would abbreviate it. I'll do that from now on. And I'll pull in a notification as well. And I'll create a connection between the data in Salesforce and that notification. And then what I'll also do is zoom out slightly and bring in a little bit more, bring in the vendor manager that I'm going to notify. So connecting those dots here as well. Now, I do have a lot of questions. So I just want to play a little bit with the idea of what is the vendor manager going to do once they get the notification, and what I think they're going to do. So now this is where the hybrid diagram becomes a little bit more processy. I think that they're going to log into the vendor certification system, and if they realize that it's actually that something needs to happen, they will communicate with the vendor to get that done. Then maybe this is maybe the vendor then goes into that system and does some updates, maybe communicates back into the vendor manager, and then the vendor manager needs to manually go into Salesforce. Hold on, let me just type this again, manual updates to get that done. Well, you know what? This is what they're asking for. So for the moment, I'm going to leave it, but I can promise you that I'm going to get back to this because it doesn't feel optimal. All right. Anyway, let's get back. Let's just put in a question for a reminder for myself. Is there an appetite for process improvement? Because they could really use it from what I know now. All right, last requirement. The solution shall provide a conversational query interface enabling that staff to retrieve the current vendor certification status. First question, not one I'm going to make a big deal of, but I am intrigued. Why conversational? I mean, it's not conversational. It's not a big deal, like I mentioned. So obviously I can solve this out of the box. Maybe they already have Agentforce. So I'll align Agentforce to it and bring that into the solution as well. Let me just zoom in a little bit there. There you go. And then the next question that I have is, how important is it that that data is actually accurate? Because we have two disconnected systems. We're relying on this manual process of the vendor manager updating the data in Salesforce. So what is the risk, or how important is it for the data to be accurate? And this is a power question, because typically I think the reaction of people is going to be very important, which could create an opening. How important for data to be accurate? Anyway, for the moment, I'm going to say the assumption is we rely on that manual process, an agent force. So I think this, for the moment, completes the solutioning. But I've already promised you, I don't feel really good about this. So the consultant in me, the consulting architect in me, wants to look into this and say, what would happen if instead of notifying the vendor manager, let's remove this notification for a minute here, I would actually notify the vendor. That feels like it might be a way to kind of easily lighten the load on the vendor manager a little bit, right? So let's assume we do that. Certification is about to expire. Vendor goes into certification system, updates vendor manager. Not really necessary per se. Let me remove this. I don't need the vendor manager to check in the certification system. I removed that communication line because what I would love to happen, and that's the other kind of improvement that I want to propose here, potentially, is to say, let's also just connect. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's connect those systems, right? And let's get the status and even update it. Again, I'm not going to go into solutioning too much, right? So I don't want to be like, do they have MuleSoft or integration, For the moment, when I'm communicating this alternative, I just want to emphasize that this might be something that could work for them. And then potentially what I could do is I could also add like an escalation if it didn't work out, so that we can prevent those vendors from being blocked. So these are this is the alternative that I can see from the analysis work that I did. So let me just go back in and log that as well in my ADR here, my decision recording. I'm going to give this a different color so that it's easier for me to identify that this belongs to option 2. And when what I do is I pretty much change the who gets notified here. So notify vendor instead of that vendor manager. Still ties in to the same type of scheduled process, different recipient. The other things that would change here is that instead of relying on that manual process, we create an automation, an integration. And now in terms of solutioning, that would create probably like another scheduled process, plus that that integration, right? Again, keeping it fairly high level here because I don't want to get bogged down in the details before I know if there's an appetite. And so with that is how that's kind of the what, how, why approach in action. And now I want to show you how I would bring that into my communication session with my stakeholders. So I'm going to use this analysis / design to communicate it. And what I always think we owe our customers and stakeholders is that we provide options, sure, but we should also always have some skin in the game and provide recommendations and reasoning for why we want to go with those options. And so how am I now going to apply that to this stakeholder conversation that we've been prepping? So it all starts with coming back to that big why. So when I present to them, I'm going to start with, my understanding is that you want to prevent compliance issues that arise from operating with uncertified vendors. Now, if during the call or the presentation, they're like, no, you got that wrong, then I have some improvisation to do. But hopefully they'll be nodding. And then I want to show them that we can meet their requirements. And I'll use those artifacts, I'll use the design, I'll meet their requirements so that I can prove that I can meet them. And I'll show them how we would do that. And then I'm just going to go out on a limb and I'm going to show them that we can also help improve the process. And that might actually get them closer to the goal, their why. And then I'm going to say something like based on our experience. And then depending on the questions, some of the questions that I had, right? Depending on how many vendors or how important it is, the data is accurate. There is additional possibilities for process improvement. And here's how I would solve that. Now, since I have absolutely no idea of context, my recommendation at this stage is going to be to at least consider notifying that vendor instead of the vendor manager, and then progressively automate more depending on risk appetite. So that's how I would do it. And with that, I want to bring back Lilith into the call. Hi, Lilith.
Hi.
So, any immediate thoughts before I bring up some questions?
So many. Always interesting to solve an RFP. So very excited to see, what we have in terms of questions.
All right. So first question that I see here is solution focused, which is fun. I'm going to throw it at you. It's a little bit of a curveball. Why not Slackbot instead of Agentforce?
So that is a very interesting one. And I think one of the reasons that I would say why not Slackbot at this point is because we are in this RFP stage, right? We only have a limited amount of information about what the customer is already using, where are they working, and I think that is a very important consideration to take here. We know that Salesforce is in the picture because that's what they mentioned. So in that sense, the step towards Agentforce is closer to what we know about their system landscape already than Slackbot would be. Now, keep in mind, Slackbot is my absolutely best friend, so happy to include him wherever. But that would be my main focus is what do we know already about our customer, and how do we make sure that we propose something that is going to resonate with them and make sense from their perspective.
100%. So if we had any indication from the RFP, maybe an architectural picture that they had Slackbot, then this proposed solution would have changed accordingly, right?
Yes, exactly. Totally agree.
Awesome. All right. Then I see something else. What additional topics or important considerations might also need to be addressed with this customer for this new / automated solution? Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So I think what is really interesting is an element that is not mentioned in our RFP. And to be honest, it might not be mentioned in a ton of RFPs, but it's something that as architects, we need to keep in mind. And that is change management. So in the original, the manual update process, whatever we're going to change in terms of system will impact our vendor managers. They might be having some solution already right now that will maybe notify them, or based on our audit, probably not, about certifications being expired. But if we bring it to that second option where we're actually notifying the vendors directly, then they need to be included in the change management process as well. And it opens up a lot of different questions. For example, like, are they already on a system? Is when we're introducing Salesforce, experience also going to be one of them? Is there this kind of portal functionality? So that is one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind and include in the case that you're going to build for the second one, again, to show that you're thinking along with them.
100%. And of course, there is so many more considerations than I can cover in this amount of time. So that's a really good addition. Just responding to Anne here on the Slackbot. Upon further discovery, Slackbot may come into the picture 100%, right? Or it would have come into the picture if we'd had additional information to begin with, right? So both of those are definitely possibilities. I'm also seeing some questions around what the tooling is that I'm using, and apologies. I typically make a habit of saying it, but I do the requirements highlighting in Lucid Spark because I like that it mocks what you would do like with a marker in a document, right? Call me old school. And I like the visual that gives to me. And then diagramming landscapes, I do in Lucid Chart. So Lilith, this is one from, let's say, from me. um, what do you think are the key communication blocks? Like based on what you know from your well, from the blogs that you wrote, etc., your experience, what are the key communication blocks that we should rely on for this conversation with the stakeholders? There are, yeah.
Yeah, so before I jump into the answer, maybe just a bit of scene setting for the people who haven't read that blog article. Highly recommend that they do, of course. But the communication blogs that I touch on in the first part of this series is basically, the sender, the message, the audience, and then some other additional elements, sorry, like a channel and a feedback loop. So just to set that scene, I think the key one here to really focus on is channel and the audience, because the channel is this RFP, and we've already mentioned how that impacts how you might communicate. You might not have a free conversation with your prospective customer, because all of this in an RFP process usually is very procedural. It's very much structured. You only get a few opportunities to ask questions. You need to provide them in a certain format, for example. You need to also think in a very meta layer that any question that you ask, your competitor might see the answer to as well. There's a lot of, like additional things, and that's why the channel is quite important. That's your context that you need to keep in mind. But most important always is your audience. This is a prospective customer. You want to show that you're thinking along with them, that you understand them, that you approach them with empathy, which is why I liked your second solution so much, because you highlighted where in their RFP, what was your, like big why? What are we really trying to solve? What tells us the most about their process and their pain points right now? And then you tie that in and you make it into, your key messaging tool, your kind of red thread through your explanation.
Awesome. Yes. And that's why, yeah, like if I don't understand the process that we're trying to implement, it's very difficult for me to make suggestions. So ideally, I map that out based on what I know. I'm seeing some cool discussion also going on around, being a BA. What happens when you get an RFP from somebody who knows enough to be dangerous, right? And that is definitely why I threw in that custom object, right? Sometimes you get people who think they know what they want, know the right words, even potentially, which might throw you off. So that's why it's always so important to keep in mind um, what you think they're actually asking for,
Yeah, and
right?
I also like that you added the additional why for this one, and I agree. I think for all the other ones, we cannot always have the additional why, because then we would need 2 hours. But
Yeah.
I think for this one, it's another reason why it is important. Understanding the why behind the custom object or some of those things is really relevant. Just there, it could be that, yeah, there's certain elements that they are missing. It could also very well be that there's certain elements that we don't know about their system landscape, about their org that they already have, or their process that has led them to this. But that
Yeah.
is why we ask questions.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm seeing here Patrice saying, would you ask questions about volumes at this time, or would you consider them later in your discovery? Very good question. I did wonder about that. I mean, I asked how many vendors. There may be other volume considerations. It's kind of tricky. I think if I don't get sometimes you get an opportunity to ask a round of questions, right? So then I would definitely include it. In this fictitious scenario, I did not have any room for asking questions in the moment. So then I would take assumptions, and I would also explain why I would take those assumptions. So maybe I would have done some research into the company, and then extrapolate from there. I have a really nice question here from Ines, Lilith, and I'm curious on your take. So have you seen RFPs, but other stuff too, that are auto-generated, and then kind of, well, I'm just going to paraphrase, that it's the quality is varying, not great, um, maybe has some weird solutions, hallucinations, overconfidence, etc., etc., etc. And how would you deal with that? when the requirements are obviously crap. I said it out loud, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. So I think that's such a good question, and it's a reality, right? I think we've all seen the AI generated RFPs. It is definitely very tricky. I think one of the key things is to read through the AI generation, and to be honest, I think also working a lot more with AI tooling yourself and using it back and forth will allow you to read through the AI. I'm not trying to say crap as well, but like garbage, because the verbiage is usually very telling. So I think what you mentioned earlier about seeing the process, reading through whatever is there, and trying to understand the process, that is still the most key element of it all. Just from how I like to approach AI tooling, I feel like you always should understand enough about what you're asking to evaluate what is coming out. Unfortunately, that is not always happening. So my main thing on this one, yes, I've seen it. I would try and read through it and actually just fight fire with fire, throw it in an AI tool as well, and just see, stripping bare all the AI verbiage, what is actually there, and can we make a process of it? Or if we try to make a process, where are the gaps?
Awesome. I think maybe in addition to that, if I really want to win the project, I'm going to try and find ways to not let it distract me or frustrate me, hard as that may be. Right. So I'll take a breath, maybe take a walk, and then come back to it and really again try to get into the overcoming the judgment on the format, but then really trying to understand and zoom in on that why, and empathize with my stakeholder. Squire is asking, how do you recommend changing the conversation when the RFP and the requirements are way off base from more obvious solutions? Like we're asking for a new or standard object or a native tool versus a custom build. So let's zoom in on that second one, right? Like let's say they are adamant about a custom build. I mean, who doesn't want to vibe code, right? At this moment. But you know that there is already something out there, out of the box, already working that would fit. How would you approach that?
So I always, again, you mentioned on the previous question that you answered, you ended with empathy. And I think empathy is going to carry you through in most of what you're communicating with your customer and how you're approaching it. And I think here, that's the same thing. What does your audience care about? What thought process went into creating this RFP, and how are they going to measure the success? If you do that, then likely you'll boil it down to some metrics, some KPIs. And that is where I usually like to tie it to. If you look at the total cost of ownership, for example, or the return on investment, time to market, all of these are usually more favorable looking at a native tool, a buy tool, than a custom solution. So that is usually how I'd like to pivot that conversation, by bringing it to a level that is very objective and also very relatable to them.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a solution focused question as well here. And I don't necessarily have an immediate answer to it. So it says, is the external vendor platform owned by the business or a subscription? And if it's owned, could a partner experience site be used? Oh, actually, as I'm writing that out loud, I do actually have have an idea. As I'm saying that out loud, the way that I'm assuming that this is operating is that we have an accrediting body. That's what I read in the RFP, that has this site. So we don't have any control over where that's hosted. That is hosted and owned by the accrediting body. And that's the assumption for this RFP.
Yeah, in that question, I am seeing two elements, right?
Okay.
I'm seeing the external vendor credential system, which is indeed completely externally hosted, not something that we are or that our customer is responsible for. And then I see the other part in your proposed solution, or the second option, let's say, where we are notifying our vendors in some way. And that might be then that experience site that was being referenced. So it depends kind of on what, it depends. Bingo. on what the question is really targeting here. But yes, definitely agree. The credential system is external. We have no control over that. If we have some kind of vendor platform that we would propose to notify our vendors, then it could be an experience site.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And yes, I'm seeing people riffing on the use of the word empathy. That is also something that we talked about, right? When we were preparing for this.
Yeah.
So important to build that relationship and understand that why to be able to go there. So
And
awesome.
also, and also to kind of manage your frustration sometimes, because we talked about, I mean, sometimes it can be frustrating, especially because usually there's a lot of time pressure for these things. And, you just want to make sure that you really get the best response possible out there. And sometimes you have such gaps in what you know that it might be really frustrating, or, yeah, the phrasing might be weird. There's all kinds of reasons why frustrations can creep up, but I feel like there again, empathy and assuming the best intention and just wanting to really understand where they are coming from, that is usually the best remedy, in my opinion. Just approach it with positivity. And I know this sounds maybe like very, yeah, spiritual or whatever, but yeah, I think that's the best approach, to be honest.
You could also say that is a very good commercial attitude to have, right? Depending on where you're coming from.
I mean, if you're answering RFPs, likely you are somewhat in some way commercial. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it looks like we've covered pretty much everything that was going on in the chat. I do want to ask you all. This was a new format that we were trying out for the summer, so focusing in on more on communication, analysis, etc. Let us know what you think, either in the comments or through feedback, right? Because if you don't like it, we won't do it again. But if you do like it, we might do something similar. And let me just, Lilith, thank you so much for your insights. And let me pitch some of the resources that we've been talking about to the group. See you. Thank you. So if you want to read more, there's these are the blogs that Lilith wrote that we were talking about. So you can follow the QR code here and learn all about strategies for communication that you could follow. And I have more, namely, please share that feedback. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you, as Lilith always said, if you want more jokes or better jokes, let us know and we'll take it into consideration. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your participation. It's amazing to see so many people and such lively discussions. Take care and see you soon.